It has happened again, another race this season where we came in with low expectations and we came out pleasantly surprised. We're talking about the French Grand Prix. We're gonna get into that right now. Cass, what caught your eye in the first half of this race?
I mean, right off the jump, typically if you lead in France, you will win the race in France because overtaking can be a little bit difficult at this circuit. And with Max messing up off the first corner, I already had in my mind, I'm like, that's it. That's it. Max just handed Lewis the win.
And even after that first lap, Hamilton was already 1.5 seconds ahead of Verstappen, which I'm going to be honest made me pretty sad because I was ready to watch Hamilton hunt down Verstappen around this track that's apparently very hard to overtake. But I feel like in this race, that was completely different from what we were seeing.
Right from the start, you had Ricciardo pulling these late braking moves, going deep into the corners, getting past his teammate, and then just slowly picking off the rest of the drivers ahead of him. On the other hand, it kind of felt like he was one of the only drivers out there, at least in the first half, making these kind of risky moves.
Another driver that comes to mind who had a great overtake was Vettel on Ocon. It really looked like those Alpines were struggling though in this first half of the race, especially with Fernando getting passed by pretty much everyone in the midfield. Pretty much from there, our main focus is back onto the top three teams. They're gaining their own substantial lead over the rest of the field. Perez is falling off. They're kind of creating a DRS train, but it doesn't look like Verstappen has the power to keep up with Hamilton.
But the real moment where we actually started to see things truly shaking up in this race was when the pit stops began to happen around laps 16-17. We had drivers like Ricciardo attempting the undercut, and it proved to be incredibly powerful. He didn't only get ahead of Gasly, but he was also able to jump Leclerc as well. And to be honest, I think that seeing this really helped Red Bull when deciding how and when to pit Max.
Yeah, because they were the first of the top three to bite and send Max in, and he had a mega outlap, so much so that he had a longer pit stop than Hamilton, but still was able to come out in front, getting his first place back. And pretty much from this point onward, the spark came back. I was finally once again excited to see Hamilton on the chase that we got taken away from us with Max's mistake on the first turn.
As per usual though, Perez was left to go long. Unsurprising, he is one of the kings of tire management on this grid, and pretty much when Perez pit and came back out, that dropped us off at our halfway point. So Chris, tell me, how in general did you feel about this first half?
Before the pit stops, most of my scores were pretty low, aside from the driving like we said, so I scored my racing as 7 for that matter, because I was pleasantly surprised. But my excitement got up also to a 7 because of the pit stops, and now we had the fight back on between Verstappen and Hamilton for the lead of this race. However, in terms of the drama, not much was happening there. I only scored that at 2, and that's most likely just because Verstappen's mistake on the first chicane. So when you combine these scores together, it comes out to a 5.3. I'm going to round that down though to a 5.25 because I do feel like I'm being a bit generous for the first half of this race.
I think my scores were actually pretty similar to yours. Racing, same thing. I put up at a 7 because you just don't expect it at this track, and it was really good quality of racing. I mean, we had Daniel pulling off these moves seemingly out of nowhere. We had a double McLaren overtake on Alonso. You had Seb getting in the mix. It was just great to see, and I really enjoyed it. In terms of the excitement, mine was at a 6, just because it took until the later half of the first half in order to see, okay, we still do have a fight for the lead on our hands. And as for the drama, maybe I was a little bit generous. I put it at a 4 just because we did have Max running off, and then we also had Lando running wide, but it was still overall pretty low level of drama in comparison to other races we've had this season. So that puts my overall score at a 5.6. I'm also going to round that down to a 5.5.
Moving on now towards the second half of this race where it came down to tire wear as the focal point. Now we sort of saw two different stories playing out here. Those that started the race on the hard tires, extending their stint as much as possible. We're looking at Aston Martin, who were having a pretty good race at this point for the grounds that they were making up from their poor qualifying the day before. They were up into 5th and 6th place by around lap 30 with still yet to pit. Our first driver to experience these tire wear problems was Charles Leclerc. Although his Ferrari didn't necessarily have the pace this weekend either, we really started to see him drop off the pace. And this began raising the question questions on if this race would actually become a two-stopper instead of the one-stop strategy that everyone came in intending on doing.
And spoiler alert, Max and Red Bull were the first ones to jump the gun and go on a slightly riskier strategy. Max comes into the pits on lap 32, and we now have to watch him climb back up the grid order to fight back at Hamilton. And we can already tell it's gonna be a nail-biter of an ending. It was a bit shocking to see that Mercedes opted to have both drivers stay out. Right away, you could tell that Valtteri was very much not happy about this decision, coming on the team radio and having a very strongly worded message for his strategist and saying, "Why don't you listen to me? I told you this should be a two-stopper."
Could have changed his results entirely, definitely would have got him on that podium, but now with Max on the charge, he gets quickly by Perez and probably saved him because it came right down to the line for when Max was going to have to make his move on Hamilton. And I feel like I'm not the only one who thought this, but I was quite shocked at how Valtteri didn't really give much defense against Verstappen when making his overtake.
Valtteri spent so much focus looking at Max and trying to position his car in accordance that he didn't hit the proper braking spot and ran super wide, basically leaving the door wide open for Max to kind of just get on past.
Probably the overtake of this race, I thought, because they were going wheel to wheel in this instant. But in this case, the Red Bull came out on top, and now it was time to watch the gap between Hamilton and Verstappen get closer and closer.
And you knew with the amount of laps left that Max would only have one chance at this. It was essentially like the first race of the season. If he messed up, there was not enough time for him to go back and get a second try.
And what kept this pretty dramatic for me was just looking at that gap. It wasn't getting shorter really quickly just because there was so much traffic that both drivers had to get past.
Not to mention the fact that Hamilton was still putting in some superb laps and sometimes matching Verstappen's pace, despite being on really old, worn tires.
So while watching those gaps, there's actually another battle that begins to start off between the two second drivers at each of the respective teams. Perez is now on the hunt for Valtteri. They're both on the one-stop strategy. However, because Perez conserved those tires, they're much fresher than Valtteri's. But there was not all that much that Valtteri could do in this instance, and Checo was able to pull off the move and get onto that third place spot. And now here we are, on lap 52 out of 53, it all boils down to this one moment.
Not to downplay it, but Max did make the overtake look really easy, and that is not to discredit Hamilton by any means. His tires were shot, like actually shot this time. There was really nothing Hamilton could do at that point, and I think he deserves some recognition for the fact that he was able to maintain the lead and that pace for so many laps despite the awful tire degradation. The win for Max was pretty much a guarantee unless the race had been cut a few laps short.
Max ends up taking the win here, Hamilton follows in second, and Sergio in third place. Two Red Bulls on the podium there, a big haul of Constructor Championship points.
Two other teams that had a fantastic day today were McLaren and Aston Martin, both teams with a double points finish, especially notable for Aston Martin considering both of their drivers qualified outside of the points. And then comparatively, Ferrari just had a pitiful day today. Dropped way down the order, just did not seem to have the pace. We're struggling with tires. It just was not their day.
But now, when getting into scoring the second half of the French Grand Prix, Cass, what'd you give it?
My excitement and racing were both up at a 7. I just love the quality content we were seeing out there. Knowing there was a true, proper, long-term battle for the lead in this race just really spices things up for me. Once again, we were seeing more moves from Ricciardo, Gasly, Lando, Perez, Max on Valtteri. It was just great stuff up there. Drama, I elevated from the first half, but I still only had it at a 6 just because the only real dramatic moment was essentially between the two leaders and that potential under investigation for Perez. Ultimately, that was overturned pretty quickly. But yeah, all the action was pretty much happening at the front. So it was dramatic because it lasted for essentially almost the entire half. But nothing else was going on behind, so I can't give it top dramatic scores. So that brings my second half scores at a 6.6. I'm going to round that down again to a 6.5.
On my side, my excitement moved up from the first half. Of course, we were having a fight for the win all the way down to the end of this race, so I scored that an 8. In terms of the driving, I scored it on par with the first half. I found that the quantity of racing went down, however the quality went up. And in terms of the drama, I scored it a 4. We had the debate between strategists. Should we do a 2-stopper? Should we not do a 2-stopper? Max had a broken radio at one point. Lewis couldn't hear his team talking to him, scoring my second half a 6.3, gonna bring that down to a 6.25. So when combining our scores for the French Grand Prix of 2021, the total score comes out to roughly a 5.87. We're gonna bump that up to a 6 though. We were pleasantly surprised with the French Grand Prix this year. Here's how the race compares to the other races so far this season.
We have 2 back-to-back races in Austria coming up in the upcoming weeks.
And so you know that means we'll be back here with another race review. Hit that like button if you've enjoyed, subscribe, hit that bell right next to it as you don't want to miss any upcoming videos.
As per usual, make sure to follow us on social media at CCF1 channel, and we will catch you in the next one. Bye!